They say the worst betrayal comes from those you love most. Tonight, Evelyn Moore would learn that truth in the cruelest way possible, divorced, humiliated, and discarded like garbage in front of a room full of billionaires who saw her as nothing. But what he didn't know, was that the quiet woman they were laughing at controlled more wealth than everyone in that mansion combined. This is the story of a woman underestimated, a husband who destroyed himself, and a revenge so perfect it didn't need to be spoken, only executed. If you want to see how this unfolds, stay with me until the very end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling of the Moore family estate cast a golden glow over the anniversary dinner, their light refracting off champagne glasses and diamond jewelry worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. 200 guests filled the grand ballroom, politicians, CEOs, socialites, and old money aristocrats who measured their worth in generations rather than dollars. The air thrummed with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about anything except which private island to visit next. At the head table, Evelyn Moore sat perfectly still. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlaced, back straight, despite the uncomfortable corset boning of the dress Daniel's mother had insisted she wear. It was cream-colored, modest to the point of matronly, deliberately chosen to make her fade into the background. No jewelry adorned her neck or wrists. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun. In a room full of peacocks, she was designed to be invisible. And for 3 years, she had played that role perfectly. "More champagne, darling." The voice came from her right. Daniel Moore, her husband, though the endearment carried all the warmth of a business transaction. Evelyn turned to look at him. Even now, even knowing what was coming, part of her remembered why she'd said yes when he proposed. Daniel was classically handsome in that way wealthy men often were. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of symmetrical features that looked good in newspaper photos. His dark suit was custom-tailored, his watch worth more than a luxury car. When he smiled, it was practiced, perfect, empty. "No, thank you," she said quietly. He didn't respond. His attention had already shifted back to the woman seated on his left, Victoria Chen, a social media influencer turned entrepreneur whose claim to fame was launching a luxury skincare line with her family's manufacturing connections. She was everything Evelyn wasn't: loud, laughing, draped in designer labels, and sporting a tan that spoke of constant travel. Her hand rested possessively on Daniel's arm. Evelyn had known about Victoria for 8 months. She'd known about the apartment Daniel kept for her in the city, the shopping trips charged to his secondary credit card, the weekends he claimed to be at business conferences that were actually spent in the Maldives or Monaco. Evelyn knew everything because she'd made it her business to know everything. But Daniel believed his wife was too simple, too naive, too grateful to have married into the Moore family to ever suspect. The first toast came from Thomas Moore, Daniel's father and patriarch of the Moore dynasty. He stood with the effortless authority of a man who'd built an empire from his grandfather's shipping fortune, expanding into real estate, technology, and media. His silver hair was swept back from a face that had graced magazine covers under headlines like "The Last Titan" and "The Man Who Owned Tomorrow." 25 years ago tonight, Thomas began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom, "My beloved wife Catherine and I celebrated our silver anniversary. We built this family on principles of excellence, ambition, and the courage to cut away anything or anyone who threatens our legacy." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's stomach tightened. The wording was deliberate. Catherine Moore rose next, diamonds glittering at her throat like a constellation of warning signs. She was a woman who'd weaponized elegance, turning social graces into instruments of destruction. Her smile was razor-sharp as she looked down the table toward Evelyn. "And speaking of cutting away dead weight," Catherine said, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous, "I believe my son has an announcement." The room fell silent. Daniel stood straightening his jacket. He didn't look at Evelyn. "Thank you all for coming tonight. As you know, the Moore family doesn't just celebrate the past. We invest in the future. And sometimes investing in the future means making difficult decisions." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Evelyn's heart was steady. She'd prepared for this moment, war-gamed it in her mind 1,000 times. But knowing something was coming and experiencing it were different things entirely. "Evelyn," Daniel said, finally turning to face her. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held something close to satisfaction. "You've been adequate as a wife. But adequacy isn't what the Moore family requires. We require excellence, vision, partners who elevate us rather than hold us back." He dropped the envelope on the table in front of her. Papers spilled out, divorce documents, already signed by his lawyers. "You're being divorced," he said simply. "Effective immediately." The room erupted in gasps and whispers, but they were performative, theatrical. Everyone here had known this was coming. They'd been invited to witness Evelyn's humiliation, to see the natural order restored. The nobody who'd somehow trapped a Moore son was finally being put back in her place. Victoria leaned into Daniel's side, her perfectly manicured hand on his chest. "It's for the best," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Daniel needs someone who understands his world, someone sophisticated." Laughter rippled through certain sections of the room. Catherine Moore's smile widened. "Evelyn, dear, you understand this is nothing personal. You're simply unsuitable. You come from nothing, you bring nothing to this family, and frankly, you've always been an embarrassment. The shopping trips where you wore department store dresses, the charity events where you didn't know which fork to use, the way you'd sit quietly in corners like some kind of Victorian ghost. It's been 3 years of my friends asking me why my son settled for so little." Each word landed like a carefully placed knife. Thomas Moore stood again, raising his glass. "To new beginnings, to the continuation of excellence, to my son's future with a partner who actually deserves the Moore name." The room erupted in applause and raised glasses. 200 people celebrating the public execution of Evelyn's dignity. She sat perfectly still, her hands still folded in her lap. Daniel leaned down, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You'll receive a settlement, $50,000. More than generous for someone who brought nothing to this marriage. My lawyers will contact you tomorrow about vacating the guest house. You have 1 week, $50,000. For 3 years of marriage into a family worth billions." "Any questions?" Daniel asked, straightening up. Evelyn looked up at him. Her face was calm, expressionless, betraying nothing of the hurricane building inside her chest. "No," she said quietly. "No questions." "Good." He turned away, already dismissing her from his thoughts. Victoria laughed at something he whispered to her. Catherine Moore gestured to 2 security guards stationed near the door. "Please escort Mrs. Moore, former Mrs. Moore, from the premises, and do ensure she doesn't try to take anything that doesn't belong to her." The guards approached, both large men in expensive suits. One of them gestured toward the exit. "Ma'am, if you'll come with us." Evelyn stood. The cream dress rustled slightly. She didn't look at Daniel or his parents. She didn't acknowledge Victoria's smirk or the whispers that followed her. She simply walked, her head high, her steps measured and deliberate. The walk across the ballroom felt endless. On either side, people she'd met at dozens of events over 3 years watched her pass. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others stared with open satisfaction. A few held up phones, capturing video of the moment for their social media feeds. She heard the fragments of conversation. About time. Never belonged here. Gold digger getting what she deserved. Daniel's finally thinking clearly. The massive oak doors opened onto the estate's front steps. Outside, rain poured from a black sky, hammering the circular driveway and the fleet of luxury cars parked along it. The temperature had dropped, and the wind carried the smell of wet stone and earth. One of the security guards held up an umbrella, but Catherine's voice cut through the rain. "She won't be needing that. Let her walk in the rain. Maybe it'll wash off some of the delusion." Laughter echoed from inside the ballroom. The guards lowered the umbrella and stepped back inside, closing the doors behind them. Evelyn stood alone at the top of the steps, rain immediately soaking through her dress, plastering her hair to her face. Through the tall windows, she could see the party continuing. Daniel had his arm around Victoria. Catherine was holding court with a group of society women. Thomas was shaking hands with a senator. They'd already forgotten she existed. Evelyn descended the steps slowly, rain streaming down her face. By the time she reached the bottom, the cream dress was ruined. heavy with water and clinging to her legs. Her shoes were soaked through. She looked like a drowned ghost. She walked to the edge of the driveway, beyond the range of the security cameras she knew were mounted at every corner of the estate. The rain was cold enough to make her shiver, but she welcomed it. It washed away the last 3 years, the pretending, the patience, the careful construction of exactly who they thought she was. From her small clutch purse, one of the few items she'd been allowed to bring, she pulled out a phone. Not the iPhone Daniel had given her for their first anniversary, the one his family could track. This was a different device entirely, one they didn't know existed. She dialed a number from memory. The call connected after one ring. "This is Moore," she said, and her voice was different now, crisp, authoritative, commanding. The voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Initiate protocol reckoning. Authorization code. Omega 77 Charlie, Whisper Throne." "Confirming authorization," a professional voice responded. "Omega 77 Charlie. Whisper Throne confirmed. Protocol reckoning is live. All assets are in position. Legal team standing by. Shall we proceed with phase 1? "Proceed with everything," Evelyn said. "I want it finished before the weekend." "Understood. Welcome back, ma'am. We've missed you." "Thank you, Harrison." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It's good to be back." She ended the call and looked back at the mansion, at the warm lights and the people celebrating her destruction. Rain ran down her face like tears she would never shed. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd discarded a nobody, a nothing, a woman with no power and no future. They had no idea that the woman standing in the rain, shivering and soaked and seemingly broken, was the same woman who'd built a multi-billion-dollar empire from nothing. The same woman who owned controlling interests in 17 major corporations across 4 continents. The same woman who'd spent 3 years carefully, methodically, patiently gathering every piece of information she needed to destroy the Moore family completely. Evelyn Moore wasn't her real name. It was her mother's maiden name, one she'd adopted when she married Daniel specifically because it couldn't be traced back to her real identity. Her real name was Evelyn Pierce, heir to the Pierce dynasty, one of the most powerful and secretive business empires in the world. A family so wealthy and so private that most people didn't even know they existed. When she was 22, fresh out of Stanford with a double degree in economics and international business, Evelyn had walked away from her family's empire. Not in anger, her parents had understood. She'd wanted to build something herself, to prove she could succeed without the Pierce name opening doors. It had taken her 8 years to build Pierce Global Holdings from a single real estate investment into a conglomerate worth $47 billion. She'd done it quietly, through shell companies and private holdings, never putting her face on magazine covers or attending galas. She'd learned to move through the world of extreme wealth like a ghost, accumulating power while remaining invisible. And then she'd met Daniel Moore at a business conference where she was attending under an assumed name, representing one of her subsidiary companies. He'd been charming, attentive. He'd pursued her with the kind of focus that felt like genuine interest. She'd believed for a brief moment that she'd found someone who saw her for who she was rather than what she had. She'd been wrong. 3 months into their relationship, she'd discovered the truth. Daniel had been dating her specifically because he thought she was nobody. His family had been pressuring him to marry, and he'd wanted a wife who would be controllable, grateful, easily managed. Someone who wouldn't threaten his inheritance or question his authority. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Instead, Evelyn had made a different choice. She'd decided to marry him, to give the Moore family exactly what they thought they wanted, a simple, quiet, powerless wife. And while they congratulated themselves on Daniel's sensible choice, Evelyn had spent 3 years learning everything about them. She knew about Thomas Moore's 3 offshore accounts, each containing money siphoned from company pension funds. She knew about Catherine's insider trading, the way she'd made millions by trading on information Daniel fed her from board meetings. She knew about Daniel's fraud, the falsified reports, the shell companies used to inflate stock prices, the investors he deliberately misled. She knew about the affairs, the bribery, the environmental violations, the worker rights abuses. 3 years of being invisible, of being dismissed and ignored, had given her access to everything. People spoke freely around someone they considered beneath notice. And while they'd been laughing at her department store dresses and her quiet demeanor, Evelyn had been buying their debt. Every bank loan keeping the Moore Corporation afloat. Every line of credit financing their lifestyle. Every mortgage on their properties. Every lease on their luxury cars. Every vendor contract supplying their businesses. One by one, through a complex web of subsidiaries and investment firms, Pierce Global Holdings had acquired it all. The Moore family didn't own their empire anymore. Evelyn did. And they were about to find out. The rain continued to fall as Evelyn turned away from the mansion. A black car pulled up silently, her real car, driven by her real security team. The door opened and Harrison stepped out, holding an umbrella. Harrison Chen was 60 years old, former British Special Forces, and had been head of her security for the past decade. He'd been with her through every major business acquisition, every negotiation, every moment when being a young woman in a male-dominated industry meant facing down people who thought they could intimidate her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice warm with genuine concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfect," Evelyn said, accepting the umbrella and climbing into the car's warm interior. "Phase 1 is active." "As of 3 minutes ago," Harrison confirmed, sliding into the front passenger seat. "The acquisition team has begun contacting their creditors. By morning, every financial institution they do business with will know that Pierce Global Holdings now owns their debt. Legal has filed the documentation with the courts, and our media team is standing by with the prepared statements." Evelyn accepted a towel from the car's center console and began drying her face and hair. In the rearview mirror, she watched the mansion recede into the distance. And the merger meeting? Scheduled for Thursday morning as requested. Daniel's team believes they're meeting with representatives from Apex International Ventures to discuss the acquisition that will save their company. Harrison allowed himself a slight smile. "They have no idea that Apex is one of your holdings." "Perfect." Evelyn pulled out a compact from her purse and examined her reflection. The woman looking back at her was someone the Moores would never recognize. Eyes sharp with intelligence, expression calculating, features that could shift from warm to commanding in an instant. "And the evidence?" "Catherine's insider trading documentation has been anonymously forwarded to the SEC. Thomas's pension fund violations are being reviewed by federal investigators as we speak. Someone sent them a very detailed tip. Daniel's fraud is compiled and ready to be released to the media the moment you give the word." "Not yet," Evelyn said. "Let them have a few days thinking they've won. Let them celebrate. Let Victoria move her things into the main house. Let them feel safe." "And then?" Harrison asked. Evelyn's smile was cold and precise. "And then we take everything." The car drove through the rain, heading toward the private airfield where Evelyn's jet waited to take her back to Pierce Global Holdings headquarters in Singapore. She had a business empire to run, investments to oversee, deals to close. But first she had a family to destroy. Inside the Moore mansion, the party continued late into the night. Daniel danced with Victoria, already planning their engagement announcement. Catherine held court, basking in the attention of society friends who praised her for finally getting rid of that dreadful girl. Thomas negotiated a political contribution with a congressman, confident that his empire would continue growing for generations. None of them noticed the subtle changes beginning to occur. The text messages from their accountants, sent to voicemail boxes that wouldn't be checked until morning. The emails from their lawyers, marked urgent, sitting unread in inboxes. The notifications from their banks, flagged as suspicious, dismissed by automated systems. The house of cards was already falling. They just didn't know it yet. In the car, Evelyn opened her tablet and pulled up the financial dashboard that controlled her empire. $47 billion in assets, spread across industries and continents. Companies that employed hundreds of thousands of people. Technologies that were changing the world. Philanthropic ventures that had lifted entire communities out of poverty. All of it built while the world thought she was nobody. All of it about to be used to crush the people who'd made the mistake of underestimating her. "Harrison," she said quietly, "tell me something. When they find out who I am, when they realize what they've done, do you think they'll understand?" Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Understand what, ma'am?" "That this was never about the divorce. This was never about revenge for being humiliated." She looked out the window at the rain-soaked city passing by. "This was about justice. They built their empire on fraud and cruelty. They destroyed people weaker than themselves because they could. The world is better off without them. I think, Harrison said carefully, that understanding requires self-awareness they don't possess. But it doesn't matter if they understand. What matters is that they can never hurt anyone else again. Evelyn nodded. Then let's make sure of that. The car drove on through the rain, carrying her toward the airport, toward her empire, toward the moment when Evelyn Pierce would step out of the shadows and into the light. The Moores had 3 days left in their fairy tale. After that, they would learn what it meant to cross someone they should have feared from the very beginning. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of the woman they thought they knew, revealing someone far more dangerous beneath. The Monday morning sun broke through Singapore's skyline in streaks of gold and amber, illuminating the 70-story glass tower that housed Pierce Global Holdings headquarters. From her corner office on the top floor, Evelyn stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up below her. She'd landed 6 hours ago, showered, changed into a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and walked into her real life as if the past 3 years had been nothing more than an unpleasant dream. Except it hadn't been a dream. And she wasn't about to let anyone forget it. The Moore Corporation's senior leadership is in full panic mode, Marcus Webb announced, striding into her office with a tablet in hand. Marcus was her chief operating officer, a former Wall Street prodigy who'd burned out at 35 and found new purpose building Evelyn's empire. He was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and loyal to a fault. Their CFO spent the weekend calling every contact he has, trying to figure out what happened to their credit lines. Evelyn turned from the window, accepting the tablet. The screen displayed a cascade of panicked emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls. And what did he discover? That every single debt instrument the Moore Corporation holds, and I mean every single one, has been transferred to a holding company called Meridian Capital Trust. Marcus grinned. Which is, of course, one of our subsidiaries. They're trying to trace the ownership structure, but our legal team built a maze that would take them months to navigate. Months they don't have, Evelyn murmured, scrolling through the communications. She could almost hear the desperation in the written words. What about Daniel personally? Still floating on cloud 9. He sent Victoria shopping with his black card this morning. She charged $73,000 at Cartier before noon. Marcus pulled up another screen. He has no idea that the credit card company is one of ours now, too. We're letting the charges go through, for now. Evelyn set down the tablet and moved to her desk, a minimalist piece of architectural beauty that held 3 monitors, each displaying different aspects of her business empire. And the merger meeting? Confirmed for Thursday at 10 a.m., Daniel's team thinks they're meeting with Apex International Ventures Acquisition Committee. They believe this merger is their salvation, a $3.2 billion deal that will inject enough capital to cover their debts and expand their operations. Marcus leaned against the edge of her desk. The irony is delicious. They're walking into a trap they think is a rescue. Who's representing us? I've assembled a team that will make them feel important. Senior partners from our legal division, investment bankers who've closed $100 billion deals, analysts who will make their company look like the opportunity of the century. Marcus paused. Right up until you walk in. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. Speaking of walking in, I need you to coordinate with Harrison. I want a security presence that makes a statement but doesn't scream aggression. This needs to look like a normal business meeting until the moment it isn't. Already handled. Harrison's team will be positioned throughout the building, and we've arranged for... Marcus stopped as Evelyn's phone buzzed. They both glanced at the screen. Daniel Moore, calling her. Evelyn stared at the name for a long moment, then picked up the phone and answered. Yes? Evelyn? Daniel's voice was clipped, annoyed. I need you to sign some additional paperwork the lawyers sent over. They're being particular about the settlement details. She put the phone on speaker so Marcus could hear. What kind of details? Nothing that concerns you. Just sign where they've marked and return it by courier today. The sooner we finalize this, the sooner you can move on with your life. There was noise in the background, Victoria's laughter, music playing. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Evelyn said, her voice perfectly neutral. Good. And Evelyn? Don't try to negotiate for more money. 50,000 is more than generous given that you brought nothing to this marriage. My lawyers assure me that any judge would agree. I'm sure they would, she replied. Daniel hung up without saying goodbye. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're not actually going to sign those, are you? Of course not, but let him think I will. Evelyn pulled up her email and forwarded the documents Daniel's lawyers had sent to her own legal team. Have our people review these. I want to know every trap they're trying to set. On it. Marcus made a note on his tablet. There's something else you should know. Catherine Moore has been calling society reporters all morning. She's planning to leak the divorce story herself, with her own spin. Let me guess. Poor Daniel, trapped in a marriage to an unsuitable woman, finally free to find real happiness? Close. More like the Moore family's commitment to excellence means making difficult decisions, even in personal matters. Marcus made a disgusted sound. She's positioning it as an inspirational story about maintaining standards. Evelyn's jaw tightened. When is she planning to release it? Tomorrow's evening news cycle. She's already confirmed an interview with that society correspondent who covers wealthy families like they're royalty. Perfect. Evelyn opened a secure messaging app on her phone. That gives us time to prepare our own media strategy. When the truth comes out, I want every major outlet to have the full story simultaneously. No spin, no management, just facts. She typed out a message to her media relations director. Prepare package Omega for release on my signal. All evidence, all documentation, all recordings. I want this airtight. The response came within seconds. Understood, standing by. Marcus watched her work with something like awe. You know, I've seen you negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, but this is different. This is personal. Is it? Evelyn looked up. I'm not doing this because Daniel hurt my feelings, Marcus. I'm doing this because the Moore family represents everything wrong with concentrated wealth without accountability. They've spent generations exploiting people, breaking laws, destroying anyone who gets in their way. This isn't revenge, it's pest control. Spoken like someone who absolutely is making it personal, Marcus said with a slight grin. But I'm not judging. They deserve everything that's coming. A knock on the office door interrupted them. Evelyn's executive assistant, Grace Park, entered with a worried expression. Ms. Pierce, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation developing that you need to see. Grace pulled up a live news feed on one of the monitors. A financial news channel was running a breaking story. Moore Corporation stock plummets on mysterious credit concerns. The anchor's voice filled the office. Dropped 17% in early trading after rumors surfaced that the company may be facing significant debt obligations. Sources close to the situation say that several major creditors have transferred the company's loans to an unknown entity, sparking concern among investors about the company's financial stability. Evelyn watched the screen impassively. That's faster than I expected. The financial community moves quickly when billions are at stake, Marcus observed. By end of day, this will be the lead story on every business channel. Grace cleared her throat. There's more. We're getting calls from other companies asking if Pierce Global Holdings is making a move in the Moore Corporation sector. Everyone wants to know if we're planning a hostile takeover. Tell them no comment, Evelyn said immediately. We're not in the business of telegraphing our moves. As Grace left to handle the calls, Evelyn's phone rang again. This time it was Thomas Moore. She didn't answer. He called 3 more times in the next 10 minutes. Then Catherine tried. Then Daniel again. Evelyn ignored them all. They're starting to understand something is wrong, Marcus noted, but they don't know what yet. They're about to find out, Evelyn replied. She pulled up a secure file on her computer. 3 years of meticulously gathered evidence, organized, cross-referenced, and legally vetted. Send this to the SEC, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the IRS. Anonymous tip, untraceable origin. Marcus hesitated. That's the nuclear option. Once that's out there, there's no pulling it back. I don't want to pull it back. Evelyn's voice was cold. They spent 3 years treating me like garbage. They humiliated me in front of 200 people. They threw me out in the rain like trash, and they did it because they thought I was powerless. She looked at Marcus directly. I'm going to show them what power actually looks like. While Singapore buzzed with the morning's business, halfway around the world in New York, the Moore family was experiencing their first real taste of fear. Daniel sat in his father's study, watching his family's stock price crater in real time. Victoria had stopped by earlier, her arms full of shopping bags, but had quickly left when she sensed the tension. Now it was just Daniel, Thomas, and Catherine, staring at screens that showed their empire bleeding value. "This doesn't make sense," Thomas growled, his face red with anger. "Our credit was solid. Our banking relationships are decades old. How does millions in debt just transfer overnight?" "Someone bought it," Daniel said, though he didn't sound convinced. "But who? And why?" Catherine paced the room like a caged animal. "What if this is about that merger? What if competitors found out and they're trying to sabotage it?" "The merger is confidential," Thomas snapped. "Only our senior team knows about it." "Then we have a leak," Catherine shot back. "Someone talked." Daniel's phone buzzed with another call from their CFO. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Talk to me, Richard." "It's bad, Daniel." Richard Chen's voice was strained. "I've been calling our banking contacts all morning. Every single one of them says the same thing. Our debt was purchased by something called Meridian Capital Trust. I've tried to trace the ownership, but it's buried under so many shell companies and offshore holdings that I can't find the actual owner." "What about our credit lines?" Thomas demanded. "Can we still access operating capital?" "That's the thing," Richard said slowly. "Technically, yes. Meridian hasn't called in any debts yet, but the very fact that our debt changed hands has spooked investors. The market thinks we're in trouble, so now we actually are in trouble. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy." Daniel felt ice forming in his stomach. "How bad is the stock price?" "Down 22% and falling. We've lost almost $800 million in market cap since opening bell." The room fell silent. "What about the Apex merger?" Daniel finally asked. "Is that still on track?" "As far as I know, yes. The meeting is still scheduled for Thursday. But Daniel, if our stock keeps falling like this, they might get cold feet. No one wants to acquire a company that looks like it's circling the drain." "Then we stop the bleeding," Thomas said firmly. "Issue a statement. Tell investors this is a routine restructuring of debt, nothing to be concerned about. Emphasize our strong fundamentals and upcoming growth opportunities." "Without mentioning the merger," Catherine added quickly, "we can't risk tipping our hand there." "I'll draft something," Richard said. "But guys, I have to tell you, something about this feels orchestrated. The timing, the way the market reacted, the fact that we can't trace who bought our debt. This isn't random." "Then find out who's behind it," Thomas ordered. "Hire whoever you need to hire. I want to know who Meridian Capital Trust really is and why they're targeting us." After Richard hung up, the three Moores sat in heavy silence. "Could it be the Ashfords?" Catherine suggested, naming a rival family in their social circle. "They've always been jealous of our success." "The Ashfords don't have the resources to buy billions in debt overnight," Daniel said. "This is someone bigger, someone with serious capital and serious connections." Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out over Central Park. "We'll weather this. We've survived worse. Remember the 2008 crisis? Everyone said we were finished, but we adapted, we pivoted, and we came out stronger." "That was different," Daniel said quietly. "That was the whole market collapsing. This is someone specifically targeting us." "All the more reason to stay calm," Thomas replied. "Panic is how you lose everything. We have the Apex merger in 3 days. That deal alone will inject enough capital to solve any debt concerns and position us for massive expansion. We just need to hold steady until Thursday." Catherine's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted. "It's Jonathan from the club. He probably heard about the stock price." She answered with forced cheerfulness. "Jonathan, darling, how are you?" Whatever Jonathan said made Catherine's face go pale. She listened for a long moment, then said, "I see. Thank you for letting me know." She hung up slowly. "What?" Daniel demanded. "Jonathan says there are rumors circulating about us, about the divorce." Catherine's voice was tight. "Someone leaked that you divorced Evelyn publicly at our anniversary party. And the story isn't flattering. People are calling it cruel, unnecessary, classless." "Who cares what people think?" Thomas scoffed. "We did what needed to be done." "We care when those people control billions in investments and sit on boards we need to impress," Catherine snapped. "Our reputation matters, Thomas. In our world, perception is everything. Daniel felt the ice in his stomach spread. The stock price, the debt transfer, the rumors. It all felt connected somehow, though he couldn't see the pattern. We'll handle it. We'll control the narrative. His phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number. Something made him answer. Mr. Moore? A professional female voice. This is Jennifer Walsh from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm calling to inform you that we've received information regarding potential irregularities in Moore Corporation's financial reporting. We'll need you to preserve all documents and communications related to your quarterly earnings statements for the past 5 years. You'll be receiving a formal notification via courier within the hour. Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of irregularities? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details at this time, but I'd advise you to secure legal representation. Good day, Mr. Moore. The call ended. Daniel looked at his parents, his face ashen. The SEC is investigating us. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Catherine sank into a chair. This can't be happening. Not now. Not when we're so close to the Apex deal. Does the SEC know about the merger? Thomas asked sharply. I don't know. She didn't say. Daniel's mind raced. But if they start digging into our financials, if they find anything questionable before Thursday? There's nothing to find, Thomas interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. We've been careful. Have we? Daniel challenged. What about those quarterly reports we massaged? The revenue projections we inflated? The offshore accounts? Those are standard business practices, Catherine insisted. Everyone does it. Everyone doesn't get investigated by the SEC, Daniel shot back. Thomas's phone rang, then Catherine's, then Daniel's again. Over the next 2 hours, the calls kept coming. Lawyers, board members, investors, each conversation worse than the last. The stock price continued to fall. Rumors spread like wildfire through their social circles. The SEC investigation became public knowledge. By evening, Moore Corporation's stock had lost 40% of its value. The financial media was running constant coverage, speculating about everything from bankruptcy to criminal charges. And through it all, no one mentioned Evelyn. She was too small, too insignificant, too forgettable to be part of their calculations. The quiet woman they'd divorced 3 days ago couldn't possibly be connected to the destruction of their empire. They never even considered it. In Singapore, Evelyn watched the news coverage with cold satisfaction. The dominoes were falling exactly as planned. The SEC investigation would take weeks to fully develop, but the damage to the Moore Corporation's reputation was immediate and devastating. Marcus brought her updates every hour. The financial press is calling it the Moore meltdown. Social media is having a field day, and that society reporter Catherine was supposed to talk to? She's now asking for an interview about the family's financial troubles instead. What about Daniel personally? Evelyn asked. Spiraling. Our sources say he's been on the phone nonstop, trying to reassure investors. Victoria posted and then quickly deleted an Instagram story showing off her new jewelry. The timing was spectacularly bad. People are already calling her a gold digger. Marcus smirked. The internet can be so cruel. Good. Evelyn checked her watch. It was Tuesday evening in Singapore, which meant Tuesday morning in New York. In 24 hours, they'll be so desperate for the Apex merger that they'll accept almost any terms. And then you walk in, Marcus finished. And then I walk in, Evelyn confirmed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Harrison. All teams in position. The Moore family has increased their private security, but they're watching for external threats. They have no idea the threat is already inside their walls. Evelyn had spent 3 years carefully placing her people in strategic positions. A secretary in Thomas's office who reported directly to her. An IT specialist who monitored all their digital communications. A junior analyst in their finance department who understood exactly what evidence to preserve. The Moores had been under surveillance for years and never knew it. Grace appeared in the doorway again. Ms. Pierce, your 6 o'clock is here. Send them in. 2 people entered, David Chang, the SEC investigator who'd called Daniel that morning, and Michelle Torres, a federal prosecutor Evelyn had worked with on previous cases involving corporate fraud. Thank you for coming, Evelyn said, gesturing to the conference table. I assume you've reviewed the materials we sent? David nodded grimly. We have, and I have to say, this is the most comprehensive case of corporate fraud I've seen in a decade. The evidence you've compiled is extraordinary. 3 years of documentation, Evelyn said simply. Every falsified report, every inflated projection, every illegal offshore transaction, all of it backed by emails, recordings, and financial records. Michelle opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. The insider trading case against Catherine Moore alone could result in significant prison time. The pension fund violations Thomas Moore committed, federal charges. And Daniel's fraud scheme, deliberately misleading investors about the company's financial health. That's potentially decades behind bars. How long until you can move? Evelyn asked. We need to verify the evidence independently, which will take some time, David said. But with what you've provided, we can fast-track the investigation. I'd estimate arrest warrants within 30 days. 30 days, Evelyn repeated. And in the meantime? In the meantime, they'll know we're watching, which means they'll be careful, paranoid, and making mistakes. Michelle smiled slightly. Pressure creates cracks. Cracks create evidence. Evidence creates convictions. After the investigators left, Evelyn stood alone in her office, looking out at Singapore's glittering skyline. Somewhere across the world, the Moore family was probably gathering for another emergency meeting, trying to figure out how their perfect world had turned into a nightmare in 72 hours. They still thought this was about business, about competition or bad luck or market forces. They had no idea it was personal. They had no idea the woman they'd thrown away in the rain was orchestrating every second of their downfall. Her phone buzzed one more time. Daniel again. This time, she answered. Evelyn? His voice was different now, stressed, uncertain. I know this is awkward, but I need to ask you something. What is it, Daniel? Did you ever mention our family's business to anyone? Any conversations you might have had? People you might have talked to about Moore Corporation? Evelyn let the silence stretch for a moment. Why would you ask me that? Things are happening, bad things, and we're trying to figure out if there's been an information leak. He paused. You understand this is serious, right? If someone used information they got from you, even innocently, you could be implicated. I see. Evelyn kept her voice neutral, almost concerned. What kind of information? Financial details, business strategies, things that only people close to the family would know. Another pause. Evelyn, if you told anyone anything, a friend, a family member, anyone, I need you to tell me now. Daniel, I barely understood your business when we were married. I certainly didn't discuss it with anyone. The lie came easily. Is everything all right? No. Everything is not all right. His voice cracked slightly. But that's not your concern anymore. Just, if anyone contacts you asking about the family, about our business, about anything, don't talk to them, and call me immediately. Of course, Evelyn said. I hope everything works out. She hung up before he could respond. Marcus had been listening from across the room. He actually thinks you might have leaked information accidentally? He thinks I'm too stupid to do it intentionally, Evelyn corrected, which is exactly what I spent 3 years making him believe. And now? Now we wait 28 more hours. Evelyn pulled up the meeting agenda for Thursday on her screen. And then we finished this. Thursday morning arrived with deceptive calm. The sky over Manhattan was clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made the city feel full of possibility. In the Moore family's penthouse, Daniel stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. His hands trembled slightly. From nerves or exhaustion, he wasn't sure anymore. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours in the past 48. The merger meeting was in 90 minutes, and everything depended on it going perfectly. You look fine, Victoria said from the bedroom doorway. She was still in her silk robe, watching him with an expression that was harder to read than it had been a week ago. Stop fussing. Daniel turned to face her. This meeting is everything. If Apex backs out because of the stock price or the SEC investigation or any of the other disasters this week, we're finished. They won't back out. Your father said the deal is solid. But Victoria's voice lacked its usual confidence. She'd been quieter since the financial news broke, less quick to flash her new engagement ring or talk about their future. My father said a lot of things that turned out to be wrong, Daniel muttered. He grabbed his suit jacket from the bed. I need to go. The meeting is at their offices downtown. I thought they were coming to you. Change of plans. They want to meet at their headquarters. Daniel had questioned it too, but his father insisted it was normal for the acquiring company to host the final negotiations. It shows they're serious. Victoria crossed the room and straightened his collar with manicured fingers. Just remember, once this deal closes, everything goes back to normal. The stock price recovers, the investigation goes away, and we can start planning our engagement party. She kissed his cheek, leaving a trace of lipstick he'd have to wipe off. You've got this. Daniel wished he felt as confident as she sounded. Downstairs, a car waited to take him to the Moore Corporation offices where he'd meet his father and their legal team. The drive through Manhattan felt surreal. All these people going about their normal Thursday, completely unaware that his entire world was balanced on a knife's edge. At Moore Corporation headquarters, the tension was palpable. Senior executives moved through the halls with forced calm, but Daniel could see the fear in their eyes. Everyone knew their jobs depended on this merger going through. In the main conference room, Thomas Moore stood at the head of the table, reviewing documents with their lead attorney, Patricia Westwood. Catherine sat nearby, perfectly dressed as always, but Daniel noticed the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers drummed against the table. Status? Thomas asked without looking up. Stock is down another 6% this morning, their CFO Richard reported. But trading volume is light. The market is waiting to see what happens with this merger. Then we give them good news. Thomas finally looked at Daniel. You ready for this? Do I have a choice? No. Thomas's voice was hard. This family doesn't fail, Daniel. We don't lose. Whatever it takes, we close this deal today. Patricia checked her watch. The car service is downstairs. We should leave in 10 minutes to make the meeting on time. Who are we meeting with exactly? Catherine asked. You never said. Apex's acquisition team, Thomas replied. Senior partners, their CFO, legal representation, standard structure for a deal this size. And we're sure they don't know about the SEC investigation? Daniel pressed. We disclosed what we're legally required to disclose, Patricia said carefully. The investigation is preliminary. No charges have been filed. It's not material to the transaction. Daniel wondered if that was true, or just what their lawyer needed to believe. The car ride to Apex International Ventures headquarters took 20 minutes through morning traffic. The building was in the financial district, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that radiated wealth and power. Daniel had never heard of Apex before they'd reached out about the merger 3 weeks ago, but their research showed a company with deep pockets and an aggressive acquisition strategy. Remind me how they found us? Daniel asked as they rode the elevator to the 45th floor. They approached us, Richard said they were looking for opportunities in our sector. The timing was perfect. Too perfect, Daniel thought, but he pushed the concern away. He was being paranoid. The stress was making him see conspiracies everywhere. The elevator doors opened onto a pristine reception area. A woman in an elegant black suit greeted them with a professional smile. Mr. Moore, welcome. Please follow me. She led them down a hallway lined with abstract art, worth more than most people's houses. Everything about the space screamed money and competence. Daniel felt some of his anxiety ease. This was real. This was happening. The conference room she showed them into was enormous, with windows overlooking the city and a table that could seat 30 people. Current market data scrolled across screens on one wall. Fresh coffee and pastries waited on a sideboard. Please make yourselves comfortable, the woman said. The team will be with you shortly. As soon as she left, Catherine moved to the windows. Impressive. Very, Thomas agreed, but his eyes were scanning the room, taking in every detail. Richard, what do we know about Apex's leadership? They keep a low profile, very private ownership structure, but their track record is solid. 12 acquisitions in the past 3 years, all successful integrations. Daniel poured himself coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking. This was going to work. It had to work. In a few hours, they'd have signed agreements, capital commitments, and a path forward that would silence all the doubters and cynics. The door opened. A security team entered first. 4 men in dark suits, professional and alert. Not unusual for a major merger meeting, but something about their precision made Daniel's instincts prickle. Then came the lawyers and executives. 6 people, all carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that came from closing billion-dollar deals before breakfast. They took seats across the table, spreading documents and tablets. "Mr. Moore," one of them said, extending a hand. "James Chen, senior partner at Apex. Thank you for coming." Thomas shook his hand firmly. "We're pleased to be here. We believe this merger represents an exceptional opportunity for both organizations." "Indeed," James said with a slight smile, though I think merger might be the wrong word for what we're discussing today. Something in his tone made Daniel's stomach drop. "I'm sorry?" Thomas's voice took on an edge. "Perhaps we should wait for our principal before getting into details," James suggested, glancing at his watch. "She should be here any moment." She. Daniel exchanged a look with his father. Their research had indicated Apex's CEO was a man named Robert Sterling. Who was this woman James was referring to? The door opened again. Daniel turned, expecting another executive or perhaps Sterling's assistant. Instead, Evelyn walked in. For a moment, his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. It made no sense. Evelyn was supposed to be packing her things from the guest house, signing divorce papers, fading into obscurity where she belonged. She wasn't supposed to be here, in this conference room, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the entire wardrobe he'd ever seen her in. She wasn't supposed to be walking with that kind of authority, that kind of presence. She wasn't supposed to look at him with eyes that were cold and calculating instead of hurt and defeated. "What?" Daniel started, but the word died in his throat. Evelyn didn't acknowledge him. She walked directly to the head of the table, his father's position, and sat down. The Apex team shifted subtly, their body language making it clear who was actually in charge. "Thank you all for coming," Evelyn said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Evelyn Pierce, CEO and majority shareholder of Pierce Global Holdings. Apex International Ventures is one of our subsidiary companies." The silence in the room was absolute. Thomas found his voice first. "What is this? What are you doing here?" "I'm here for a business meeting," Evelyn replied calmly. "You wanted to discuss a merger with Apex. I'm Apex's owner, so here I am." Catherine's face had gone pale. "This is absurd. Evelyn, whatever game you think you're playing, this isn't a game, Catherine." Evelyn's eyes moved to her former mother-in-law. "This is business. Please sit down, all of you." "We will not," Thomas started. "Sit down." The command in Evelyn's voice was unmistakable. "Or my security team will escort you from the building, and this meeting ends immediately. Your choice." Daniel watched his father's face cycle through shock, anger, and finally calculation. Thomas sat. Catherine followed. Daniel remained standing for a moment longer, trying to understand how the quiet woman who'd served him coffee every morning had transformed into this. He sat. Evelyn opened a folder in front of her. "Let's begin with some clarity about your situation. Moore Corporation currently carries $3.7 billion in debt. That debt was held by 17 different financial institutions until Monday of this week, when it was purchased by Meridian Capital Trust." She looked up. "Meridian Capital Trust is also one of my subsidiaries." Richard's voice came out strangled. "That's not possible. That much debt transferred that quickly. It's entirely possible when you have the resources and relationships I have," Evelyn interrupted. "I also own controlling interest in 6 of your major suppliers, 3 of your distribution partners, and hold significant positions in companies that represent 42% of your annual revenue." She slid a document across the table. Thomas grabbed it, his hand shaking as he scanned the pages. "This is a complete map of your business ecosystem," Evelyn continued. "Every relationship, every dependency, every pressure point. And as you can see, I control most of it." Daniel felt like he was drowning. How is any of this possible? You're nobody. You came from nothing. I came from one of the wealthiest families in the world," Evelyn said, finally looking directly at him. "The Pierce family. My father is Jonathan Pierce. Perhaps you've heard of him?" The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Everyone in finance knew Jonathan Pierce, a billionaire so wealthy and so private that he rarely appeared in public. His empire spanned continents, industries, sectors. He was the kind of money that made the Moore family look like pretenders. "You're lying," Catherine whispered. Evelyn pulled out her phone, pressed a button, and set it on the table. A man's voice came through, warm and cultured. "Hello, sweetheart. How's the meeting going?" "Dad," Evelyn said, her voice softening slightly, "say hello to the Moores." "Ah, yes, the family that made the mistake of underestimating my daughter." Jonathan Pierce's voice carried amusement and steel in equal measure. "I trust you're all realizing the depth of your error." Thomas leaned forward. "Mr. Pierce, there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding was yours," Jonathan cut him off. "You thought my daughter was powerless because she chose to be invisible. You mistook her kindness for weakness, her patience for stupidity. That was your first mistake. Humiliating her publicly was your second. And your third, your fatal mistake, was building your empire on fraud and corruption." Evelyn ended the call. "My father wanted me to pass along his regards." Patricia, the lawyer, had been frantically typing on her tablet. She looked up, her face ashen. "It's true. All of it. Pierce Global Holdings owns Meridian Capital Trust, Apex International Ventures, and dozens of the companies she mentioned. The ownership structures are buried, but they're legitimate." "So this was all a setup," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "The merger offer, the timing, you orchestrated all of it." "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "I spent 3 years learning everything about your family and your business. I knew you were leveraged heavily, knew your actual financial position was much weaker than your public statements suggested. I knew that with the right pressure at the right time, you'd become desperate enough to accept any deal that looked like salvation." She stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the city. "You threw me out in the rain, Daniel. You handed me divorce papers in front of 200 people and told me I was nothing. Your mother called me an embarrassment. Your father toasted to cutting away dead weight." She turned back to face them. "So I decided to show you what nothing actually looks like, what powerless actually means." Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "What do you want? Money? Is this blackmail?" "I don't need your money, Thomas. I have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes." Evelyn returned to her seat. "What I want is justice, for me and for every person your family has crushed on your way to the top." She nodded to James, who pulled out another set of documents. "This is a formal demand for immediate repayment of all debt owed to Meridian Capital Trust. $3.7 billion, due within 30 days. "That's impossible," Richard stammered. "We don't have that kind of liquidity. You know we don't. It would require liquidating assets, bankruptcy." "Yes, it would," Evelyn agreed, "unless you had another option. Which brings us to the actual purpose of this meeting." She slid a contract across the table. "This is an acquisition offer. Pierce Global Holdings will purchase Moore Corporation in its entirety. All assets, all liabilities, all subsidiaries. In exchange, we'll assume the debt and pay shareholders $20 per share." Daniel looked at the number and felt sick. Their stock had been trading at $73 per share a week ago. $20 was barely above bankruptcy valuation. "You're stealing our company," Catherine said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm offering you a way out of the destruction you brought on yourselves," Evelyn corrected. "You can accept this offer and walk away with something, or you can refuse and watch everything collapse into bankruptcy. Either way, you're finished. This just determines whether you leave with dignity or in handcuffs." "Handcuffs?" Thomas's face was purple. "You're threatening us?" "I'm informing you of reality." Evelyn's voice was ice. "The Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the IRS all received detailed evidence of your crimes 3 days ago. Insider trading, pension fund fraud, securities fraud, tax evasion. The investigations are already underway." She pulled out a tablet and pulled up news articles. "By tomorrow morning, major media outlets will publish exposés about the Moore family's criminal activities, all backed by documentation, recordings, and testimony. Your reputation will be destroyed by sunset." Patricia was frantically reading through the acquisition contract. This is actually generous given the circumstances. If even half of what she's saying is true, bankruptcy is inevitable." "It's all true," Evelyn said. "And you have 2 hours to accept the offer. After that, I withdraw it and let nature take its course." Daniel felt the walls closing in. This couldn't be happening. The woman who'd brought him coffee and smiled shyly at his jokes couldn't be the same person calmly destroying his family's legacy. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "If you're so rich, so powerful, why did you marry me in the first place? Why the charade?" Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Because I thought you were different. When we met, you seemed genuine, kind. I thought maybe I'd found someone who could love me for who I was, not what I had." Her expression hardened. "I was wrong. You wanted a wife you could control, someone grateful and obedient. So I gave you exactly what you wanted while I learned who you really were." "And what am I?" Daniel asked bitterly. "A fraud. A coward. A man who inherited everything and earned nothing." She stood. "You're also going to prison, Daniel. All three of you are." Catherine surged to her feet. "You vindictive little—" The security team moved instantly, positioning themselves between Catherine and Evelyn. "Careful," Evelyn warned. "Assault won't help your situation." Thomas grabbed Catherine's arm, pulling her back. He was breathing hard, his face still purple, but Daniel could see the calculation in his father's eyes. The man was a survivor, always had been. 2 hours, you said? Thomas asked. 2 hours, Evelyn confirmed. "And if we accept? What happens to us personally?" "You sign over the company, resign from all positions, and cooperate fully with federal investigations. In exchange, I won't pursue civil litigation for the damage you've done to countless people over the years. I can't stop the criminal charges. That's up to prosecutors. But I won't add to your legal problems." "And if we refuse?" "Then I take the company anyway through bankruptcy proceedings. But it takes longer and costs more in legal fees. You'll lose everything either way. This way is just faster and less public." Evelyn checked her watch. "You now have 1 hour and 58 minutes. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Daniel? That $50,000 settlement you offered me? You can keep it. Consider it a parting gift." The door closed behind her, leaving the Moore family in stunned silence. Patricia spoke first. "We need to accept. There's no other choice." "Like hell," Catherine spat. "We fight this. We—" "Fight with what?" Richard interrupted. "She owns our debt. She owns our suppliers. She has evidence of crimes we actually committed. And if she's really Jonathan Pierce's daughter, she has resources we can't even imagine." Thomas sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "How did we miss this? How did we not know?" "Because she was invisible," Daniel said quietly. "That was the point. We saw what we wanted to see." Catherine was pacing. "There has to be a way out. We could reach out to our contacts, call in favors." "Our contacts are abandoning us," Richard said, looking at his phone. "I've had 6 calls this morning from board members resigning. The rats are leaving the ship." Patricia cleared her throat. "Legally speaking, this acquisition offer is our best option. If we declare bankruptcy, creditors will tear the company apart, and we'll be lucky to walk away with anything. This at least provides some compensation to shareholders and protects you from civil liability." "What about the criminal charges?" Thomas asked. "Those are separate. I can't make them go away." Patricia's expression was grave. "But if you cooperate, if you don't fight the acquisition, it might help at sentencing. Judges look favorably on defendants who take responsibility." Daniel felt numb. A week ago, he'd been on top of the world. Now he was discussing plea deals and sentencing. "What about Victoria?" he asked suddenly. Everyone looked at him. "What about her?" Catherine asked impatiently. "She's going to leave, isn't she? When this all comes out, when the money is gone, she'll disappear." No one answered, which was answer enough. Thomas stood and walked to the windows, staring out at the city that had once felt like his kingdom. "Call Patricia. Tell her we accept." "Thomas, no," Catherine started. "We accept," Thomas repeated, his voice dead. "It's over, Catherine. We lost." Patricia began preparing the necessary documents while Richard made calls to notify the board of directors. Catherine sat frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking. Daniel watched it all happen with the detached feeling of someone watching their life from a distance. An hour and 40 minutes later, the contracts were signed. Moore Corporation, 3 generations of family legacy, became property of Pierce Global Holdings with the stroke of a pen. Thomas, Catherine, and Daniel resigned from all positions effective immediately. The company they'd built, the empire they'd protected, the legacy they'd killed for was gone. Evelyn returned to the conference room to receive the signed documents. She reviewed each page carefully, then nodded to her legal team. "The acquisition is complete," she said. "You're free to go." Thomas stopped at the door. "Was any of it real? The marriage, the conversations, did you feel anything at all?" Evelyn met his eyes. "I felt everything. I felt humiliated when you made jokes about my clothes at dinner parties. I felt small when Catherine introduced me as Daniel's unfortunate choice. I felt worthless when your friends looked through me like I didn't exist, and I felt absolutely nothing when Daniel handed me divorce papers in front of 200 people." She paused. "So yes, it was real. My pain was real. My anger is real. And your consequences are very, very real." As the Moores filed out, escorted by security, Daniel turned back one last time. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "No, you're not. You're sorry you lost. There's a difference." The elevator doors closed on his face. Alone in the conference room, Evelyn allowed herself a moment to breathe. Marcus appeared at her side. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Ask me tomorrow," she replied. "Right now we have a press conference to prepare for. The world is about to learn the truth about the Moore family, and I want to make sure they hear it from us first. The media teams are ready. We'll release everything simultaneously, the fraud evidence, the acquisition announcement, the full story." Evelyn nodded. "Good. And Marcus? Make sure the narrative is clear. This isn't a revenge story. This is a story about accountability, about powerful people finally facing consequences for their actions." "Understood." Marcus hesitated. "For what it's worth, I think you handled that perfectly. You gave them a chance to do the right thing." "They didn't deserve a chance," Evelyn said, "but I gave them one anyway. Because unlike them, I actually have principles." She gathered her things and headed for the elevator. Outside, the sun was still shining on Manhattan, indifferent to the empires that rose and fell beneath it. By sunset, the world would know the truth. By tomorrow, the Moore family would be headline news for all the wrong reasons. And Evelyn Pierce would step out of the shadows and into the light, no longer invisible, no longer underestimated, no longer afraid. The quiet woman they'd thrown away in the rain had become the storm that destroyed them. And she was just getting started. The press conference was scheduled for 3 o'clock that same afternoon, giving the Moore family exactly enough time to understand what was about to happen, but not enough time to stop it. Evelyn stood in the green room of Pierce Global Holdings' New York satellite office, watching on monitors as reporters filed into the main conference hall. Every major financial news outlet had sent their senior correspondents. The room buzzed with speculation about why Evelyn Pierce, a name most of them had never heard until this morning, had called such an urgent briefing. "We're at capacity," Grace informed her, checking her tablet. "Overflow is being directed to the simulcast room. Social media teams are standing by. Legal has approved all statements." Evelyn adjusted her suit jacket, the same charcoal gray she'd worn to destroy the Moores that morning. In the mirror, she looked every inch the billionaire CEO she actually was, poised, powerful, untouchable. The transformation from invisible wife to business titan was complete. "Miss Pierce?" A young assistant poked her head in. "There's a call for you, Daniel Moore. He says it's urgent." "Tell him I'm unavailable," Evelyn said without hesitation. "He says he knows what you're planning. He's threatening legal action to stop the press conference." Evelyn almost laughed. "He can threaten whatever he wants. His lawyers quit this morning when they realized they wouldn't be paid. Put him through to Marcus instead. Let him waste someone else's time." The assistant nodded and disappeared. Through the monitors, Evelyn could see the press corps settling in, cameras being positioned, microphones tested. In exactly 7 minutes, she would walk onto that stage and detonate a bomb that would obliterate what remained of the Moore family's reputation. Marcus entered the green room, phone in hand. "Daniel is having a meltdown. He's demanding we delay the press conference, claiming we're violating confidentiality agreements." "What confidentiality agreements?" "Exactly." Marcus grinned. "I told him if he had actual legal grounds, He should file an injunction. He hung up. Where is he now? According to our people, he's at the penthouse with Victoria. She's packing. Apparently, she's decided their relationship has run its course. Marcus made air quotes. Shocking development, really. Who could have predicted a social climber would abandon a sinking ship? Evelyn felt a flicker of something. Not quite satisfaction, but close. And Thomas and Catherine? Holed up in their estate. They've disconnected the phones and aren't answering the door. Their lawyer sent us a cease and desist letter demanding we not disclose privileged information at the press conference. Marcus held up his phone. Our lawyers responded that everything we plan to disclose is either public record or was obtained legally through our own investigation. The cease and desist has no teeth. Good. Evelyn checked her watch. 5 minutes. Status on the federal investigations? SEC is preparing to announce formal charges tomorrow morning. FBI is coordinating with federal prosecutors. IRS has already frozen several of their offshore accounts. Marcus consulted his notes. Catherine's insider trading case is apparently slam dunk. They have emails where she explicitly tells Daniel to feed her information from board meetings before announcements. And Thomas? The pension fund fraud is worse than we thought. He didn't just borrow from employee retirement accounts, he outright stole from them. Millions of dollars that should have been securing people's futures gone. Some of those employees are in their 70s now, working because they can't afford to retire. Evelyn's jaw tightened. This was why she was doing this. Not just for herself, but for all the people the Moores had casually destroyed while building their empire. 2 minutes, Grace announced. Evelyn took a deep breath and walked toward the stage entrance. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, the anticipation hanging in the air. This was the moment everything changed, not just for the Moores, but for her. After today, she could never be invisible again. The thought didn't frighten her anymore. Grace gave her the signal. Evelyn stepped onto the stage. The camera flashes were immediate and blinding, a wall of light that would have overwhelmed her a week ago. Now she walked through it with perfect composure, taking her position at the podium. The Pierce Global Holdings logo displayed on screens behind her, a company worth $47 billion that most of the world was learning about for the first time today. She waited for the noise to settle, letting the silence build. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Evelyn Pierce, CEO and majority shareholder of Pierce Global Holdings. I've called this press conference to announce several developments that I believe are in the public interest." Hands shot up immediately, reporters shouting questions. Evelyn ignored them. First, Pierce Global Holdings has acquired Moore Corporation in its entirety. The acquisition was completed this morning and includes all assets, subsidiaries, and liabilities. The Moore family has resigned from all operational and board positions, effective immediately. The room erupted. Evelyn waited again for quiet. Second, I want to address certain facts about my relationship with the Moore family that provide context for this acquisition. 3 years ago, I married Daniel Moore. I did so under my mother's maiden name, Moore, which obscured my connection to the Pierce family business empire. Throughout our marriage, the Moore family believed I was a woman of limited means and no significant business experience. She paused, letting that sink in. They were wrong. I chose to be invisible while I learned the truth about who they really were. What I discovered was a pattern of fraud, corruption, and criminal activity spanning decades. Now she had their complete attention. Over the past 72 hours, evidence compiled during my 3-year investigation has been provided to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Internal Revenue Service. This evidence documents insider trading, securities fraud, pension fund embezzlement, tax evasion, and numerous other violations of federal law. The reporters were frantically typing, filming, recording every word. "I want to be clear about something," Evelyn continued. "This is not a personal vendetta. This is about accountability. The Moore family has spent generations exploiting people they considered beneath them. They've destroyed careers, stolen retirement funds, and manipulated markets for their own enrichment. They did this because they believed their wealth and connections made them untouchable." Her voice hardened. "They were wrong about that too." She nodded to Marcus, who began distributing information packets to the press corps. "You'll find in these materials extensive documentation of the Moore family's criminal activities. All of this information has been verified by independent auditors and is now part of active federal investigations. We encourage you to examine it thoroughly. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal stood. Ms. Pierce, you mentioned you were married to Daniel Moore. Were you still married when you began acquiring their debt and planning this takeover? I was divorced 4 days ago, Evelyn replied. The divorce was initiated by Daniel Moore in a public ceremony at his parents' anniversary dinner, where I was humiliated in front of 200 guests and escorted from the premises. The acquisition strategy was implemented after the divorce, using information I gathered during the marriage about the company's actual financial condition versus what they reported publicly. Is this revenge? Another reporter called out. This is justice, Evelyn corrected. The Moore family committed crimes. They hurt people. They broke laws. What's happening to them now is the natural consequence of their own actions. I simply ensured those consequences would actually arrive. A reporter from Bloomberg stood. What will happen to Moore Corporation's employees? The company employs over 15,000 people. Pierce Global Holdings is committed to maintaining employment for all current Moore Corporation employees who wish to stay. We'll be conducting a comprehensive review of operations, and we anticipate growth, not layoffs. The fraud was committed by the Moore family leadership, not by the hardworking people who built actual value in that company. The questions continued for 40 minutes. Evelyn answered each one calmly, precisely, never deviating from the facts. She detailed the acquisition, the evidence against the Moores, her own background and qualifications. By the time she left the stage, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the Moore family was finished. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Billionaire heiress destroys ex-husband's family empire, screamed the New York Times headline. The invisible wife who brought down a dynasty, proclaimed the Washington Post. Moore family faces federal charges after stunning acquisition, reported the Wall Street Journal. Social media exploded. The story had everything: wealth, deception, revenge, crime. Hashtags trended worldwide. Evelyn's name became the most searched term on the internet. Financial analysts dissected every aspect of the acquisition. Legal experts debated the criminal charges. Society columnists gasped over the public divorce and dramatic reversal. And through it all, the evidence kept mounting. The SEC announced formal charges against Catherine Moore at 9 a.m. Friday morning. Insider trading, securities fraud, and conspiracy. The allegations detailed a scheme where she'd made over $17 million by trading on information Daniel fed her from confidential board meetings. The evidence included emails, trading records, and testimony from brokers who'd grown suspicious of her impossibly well-timed trades. Catherine was arrested at her estate at noon. Photographers captured her being led out in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattered. She screamed at the cameras, calling Evelyn a liar, a manipulator, a vindictive witch. The footage played on every news channel for the next week, becoming the visual symbol of entitled wealth facing consequences. Thomas's arrest came that evening. Federal agents arrived with a warrant based on the pension fund embezzlement evidence. The charges were devastating: wire fraud, theft from employee benefit plans, money laundering. He'd stolen over $40 million from retirement accounts, money that belonged to warehouse workers, administrative staff, and lower-level managers who'd trusted the company to secure their futures. The FBI perp walk was deliberate and public. Thomas Moore, the titan of industry who'd graced magazine covers and commanded respect in boardrooms around the world, shuffled out of his mansion in handcuffs while agents carried out boxes of evidence. His face was gray, his legendary confidence gone. Daniel's arrest was delayed by 24 hours because they couldn't find him. He'd fled the penthouse after Victoria left, taking only a small bag and his passport. For a day and a half, he vanished. Federal marshals tracked his credit cards to a hotel near JFK Airport, where he'd apparently been planning to flee the country. They arrested him at the airport, trying to board a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. The charges against him included everything his parents faced, plus additional counts of fraud related to deliberately misleading investors about Moore Corporation's financial health. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 30 years in federal prison. The media had a field day. Coward heir attempts to flee justice, read one headline. Daniel Moore caught running from consequences, proclaimed another. The image of him being marched through the airport in handcuffs, looking terrified and small, became iconic. This was the man who'd confidently handed his wife divorce papers in front of a crowd. This was the golden boy who'd inherited everything and appreciated nothing. Now he looked exactly like what he was, a fraud and a coward. Evelyn watched the arrest footage from her office in Singapore, where she'd returned to run her actual business empire. She felt no triumph, no joy, just a cold sense of completion. All three are being held without bail, Marcus reported via video call. The prosecution argued their flight risks given Daniel's attempt to leave the country. The judge agreed. What about their legal defense? They're struggling. Their primary law firm dropped them when the retainer checks bounced. They've hired a public defender for Catherine, and Thomas and Daniel are sharing a lawyer who used to work for them, but left the firm years ago. Marcus consulted his notes. Not exactly the dream team they're used to. And the victims? The employees who lost pension money are organizing a class action lawsuit. We've offered to connect them with top employment lawyers at our expense. Marcus smiled slightly. They're very grateful to you. They shouldn't be grateful. They should be angry this happened in the first place. Evelyn pulled up the financial statements for the Moore Corporation acquisition. What's the timeline on restructuring the company? Legal teams are working through all existing contracts. We should have a preliminary plan within 2 weeks. The company is actually profitable once you remove the fraud and embezzlement. It was just being looted by the family. A notification popped up on Evelyn's screen. She clicked it and found herself looking at a message from an unknown number. It was from Daniel. The message was long, rambling, desperate. He claimed he'd been manipulated by his parents, that he never knew about the fraud, that he was a victim too. He begged her to drop the charges against him, to remember the good times they'd shared, to show mercy. He ended with, "I know you're not a cruel person, Evelyn. The woman I married wouldn't destroy someone's entire life over hurt feelings. Please. I'm begging you." Evelyn read it twice, then deleted it without responding. "Problem?" Marcus asked, seeing her expression. "Just Daniel trying to rewrite history." She closed the message window. "He wants me to believe he's a victim. Are you going to respond?" "No. He'll learn soon enough that I'm not the woman he thought he married. I never was." The weekend brought new developments. Victoria Chen, Daniel's former fiancée, gave an interview to a major entertainment news show. Dressed in designer clothes Daniel had bought her, she tearfully explained how she'd been deceived by the Moore family, how she'd had no idea about their criminal activities, how she was heartbroken by the betrayal. The interviewer asked if she'd known about the divorce being planned. Victoria's tears dried up instantly. "Of course I knew. Daniel told me he was finally getting rid of that mousy little wife who'd been holding him back. We were celebrating his freedom." She realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. I thought what I meant was..." The clip went viral. Victoria became the face of superficial gold-digging opportunism. Her social media filled with thousands of comments calling her out. Brands that had sponsored her dropped their partnerships. The skincare line she'd launched with her family quietly disappeared from shelves. She tried to do damage control, but the internet had turned against her. In trying to distance herself from Daniel's crimes, she'd revealed herself to be exactly what everyone suspected. Someone who'd been with him only for the money and status, who'd actively participated in humiliating his previous wife, and who'd fled the moment the wealth disappeared. Evelyn watched that interview with grim satisfaction. Victoria had chosen to be cruel when she thought there would be no consequences. Now she was learning otherwise. The Moore family's society friends scattered like roaches when lights turned on. People who'd laughed as Evelyn was escorted out in the rain now claimed they'd always thought the divorce was in poor taste. Families who'd celebrated Daniel's engagement to Victoria now said they'd never really approved of her. The same social circle that had enabled and encouraged the Moores' behavior for generations suddenly developed collective amnesia. Evelyn wasn't surprised. The truly wealthy protected themselves first, and the Moores were now toxic. 3 weeks after the arrest, the Moore family estate was seized by federal authorities as part of asset forfeiture proceedings. The mansion where Evelyn had been publicly humiliated, where she'd endured 3 years of subtle and not-so-subtle abuse, where 200 people had celebrated her disposal. That mansion was now government property. Evelyn made an offer to purchase it. The government accepted. She signed the papers on a Tuesday morning, officially becoming the owner of the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. Standing in the grand ballroom where the anniversary dinner had taken place, Evelyn felt the weight of the past 3 years settle over her shoulders. "What are you going to do with it?" Harrison asked, standing respectfully near the door. Evelyn looked around the room, the crystal chandeliers, the expensive artwork, the gleaming floors. She remembered standing here in a cream dress, watching Daniel hand her divorce papers. She remembered the laughter, the toasts, the celebration of her humiliation. "I'm going to turn it into something that matters," she said quietly. "Something that actually helps people instead of just displaying wealth." Over the next month, while the Moore family awaited trial, Evelyn began the transformation. The grand ballroom became a conference center. The family quarters were converted into private rooms. The extensive grounds were landscaped into peaceful gardens. The Moore family estate became the Pierce Foundation Center for Women in Crisis, a sanctuary for women escaping abuse, women rebuilding their lives, women who needed resources and support to reclaim their power. The room where Evelyn had been handed divorce papers became the main counseling center. The table where Thomas had toasted to "cutting away dead weight" was replaced with desks where women worked with lawyers, financial advisors, and career counselors. The mansion that had represented 3 generations of Moore family cruelty became a place of healing. The grand opening was scheduled for the same date as the Moore family trial. Evelyn stood on the front steps, the same steps where she'd walked out into the rain, and addressed a crowd of reporters, donors, and the first residents who would be helped by the center. "This place used to represent everything wrong with concentrated wealth," she said. "It was a monument to excess, to cruelty, to the idea that money and status made people untouchable. Today it becomes something different. Today it becomes a place where people who've been made to feel powerless can find their strength again." She looked directly at the cameras. "To every woman who's been told she's nothing, who's been dismissed or discarded or treated as invisible, you matter. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And the people who tried to make you feel small were wrong." The speech went viral, shared millions of times across social media. Women from around the world reached out, sharing their own stories of being underestimated, of fighting back, of reclaiming their power. Evelyn became an unexpected symbol, not of revenge, but of transformation. The trial began on a cold January morning, exactly 2 months after Evelyn had walked out of the Moore mansion in the rain. Federal prosecutors presented a devastating case. Emails detailing the fraud, recordings of Catherine giving insider trading instructions, financial records showing money flowing from employee pensions into Thomas's offshore accounts, testimony from former employees who'd lost everything while the Moores lived in luxury. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt, to suggest the evidence was circumstantial or manipulated. But the paper trail was too clear, the testimony too damning, the facts too overwhelming. Daniel took the stand in his own defense, a decision his lawyer clearly opposed. He claimed he'd been manipulated by his parents, that he'd trusted them without verifying their actions, that he was guilty only of being naive. The prosecution destroyed him on cross-examination. They showed emails where Daniel had personally signed off on fraudulent financial reports. They played recordings of him bragging to investors about growth numbers he knew were false. They presented evidence that he'd personally profited from the schemes to the tune of $30 million. By the time he left the stand, Daniel looked broken. Catherine never testified. Her lawyer advised against it, knowing the prosecution had her cold on the insider trading charges. She sat through the trial with perfect posture and dead eyes. The society queen reduced to a defendant. Thomas did testify, trying to claim that borrowing from pension funds was a standard business practice during cash flow problems, that he'd always intended to pay it back with interest. The prosecution showed that he'd purchased a yacht with some of the money and had transferred millions to offshore accounts his employees couldn't trace. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on all counts for all 3 defendants. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Evelyn didn't attend. She'd made her peace with the outcome and had no need to watch them be sentenced. She learned the results from Marcus, who called from the courthouse. "Catherine got 8 years, he reported. Thomas got 15. Daniel got 12. Evelyn absorbed the numbers. Catherine would be in prison until she was 73. Thomas would likely die behind bars. At 68 with a heart condition, 15 years was essentially a life sentence. Daniel would be 47 when he got out, his entire adult life consumed by his crimes and their consequences. "How did they react?" she asked. Catherine cried. "First time I've seen her show genuine emotion." Thomas just stared straight ahead. Daniel tried to make a statement about how sorry he was, but the judge cut him off. Marcus paused. "It's over, Evelyn. They're finished." "Good." She ended the call and stood at the windows of her Singapore office, looking out over the city. Somewhere across the world, 3 people who'd made the mistake of underestimating her were being transported to federal prison. The empire they'd built on fraud and cruelty had been dismantled. The name that had once commanded respect now inspired disgust. The quiet woman they'd thrown away in the rain had done exactly what she'd promised herself that night. She'd taken everything. 6 months after the sentencing, Evelyn Pierce stood in the main hall of what was now called the Pierce Foundation Center, watching the spring sunlight stream through windows that had once illuminated her humiliation. The transformation was complete. Every trace of the Moore family's ostentation had been stripped away and replaced with purpose. Where crystal chandeliers had hung, now there were simple but elegant fixtures. Where priceless artwork had decorated walls to impress guests, there were now photographs of women who'd rebuilt their lives after crisis. Where a family had celebrated cruelty, there was now healing. "Ms. Pierce?" A young woman approached tentatively. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she'd arrived at the center 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes she was wearing and a restraining order against her ex-husband. Now she wore professional attire donated by one of the center's partners and carried a folder that Evelyn recognized as containing job offer letters. "I wanted to thank you before I leave tomorrow." Evelyn turned from the window, giving Sarah her full attention. "You don't need to thank me. You did the hard work yourself. But you gave me the space to do it." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears that didn't fall. "When I got here, I thought my life was over. I had no money, no job prospects, nowhere to go. I thought I'd made such terrible choices that I'd never recover." She clutched the folder tighter. "You showed me that wasn't true, that I could start over." "What did you decide?" Evelyn asked, nodding toward the folder. "The marketing position in Boston. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I earned it." Sarah smiled, and it transformed her face. "I start in 2 weeks. The center's housing assistance program is helping me find an apartment, and the financial literacy program taught me how to budget for the first time in my life." Evelyn felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever she saw the center's work bearing fruit. This was why she'd done all of it, not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but for this. For women like Sarah who deserved a second chance. "You're going to do wonderfully," Evelyn said, and meant it. After Sarah left, Evelyn walked through the center's corridors, observing the transformation that happened here every day. In the computer lab, women learned skills for the digital economy. In the legal clinic, pro bono attorneys helped survivors navigate divorces, custody battles, and restraining orders. In the counseling rooms, therapists provided trauma-informed care. In the child care center, kids played safely while their mothers attended classes or job interviews. The Moore mansion had become a factory for rebuilding lives. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Grace reminded her gently, appearing at her elbow with a tablet. "They're gathering in the conference room." Evelyn nodded and made her way to what had once been Thomas Moore's private study. The room where he'd plotted business deals and counted his money was now a bright, modern conference space where the Pierce Foundation's board made decisions about programs and funding. The board members were already assembling, executives from Pierce Global Holdings, nonprofit leaders, social workers, and most importantly, 3 women who'd been residents of the center and had gone on to rebuild their lives so successfully they now helped guide its mission. "Let's begin," Evelyn said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Not because she needed to dominate, but because she'd learned that sometimes visibility was its own form of power. The meeting covered expansion plans. The center had been so successful in its first 6 months that they were already planning satellite locations in 3 other cities. The wait list for residents was over 200 women long. Donations were pouring in from people inspired by the center's mission and Evelyn's story. "We're also getting requests for interviews," Grace noted. Every major publication wants to do a profile on you. 60 Minutes has called 3 times this week. Still declining, Evelyn said firmly. This isn't about me. With respect, one of the board members interjected, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. It is about you. Not exclusively, but your story matters. Women need to see that survival is possible, that fighting back is possible, that they don't have to accept being treated as less than human. Evelyn considered this. She'd spent 3 years being invisible by choice, then another 3 being invisible because the Moors demanded it. The past 6 months had thrust her into the spotlight whether she wanted it or not. Learning to use that visibility as a tool rather than a burden was still a work in progress. I'll think about it, she said finally, but only if the focus is on the work, not the drama. The work is dramatic, Patricia countered gently. You turned the place where you were humiliated into a place of healing. That's powerful. The meeting continued for another hour, covering budgets and programs and success metrics. By the time it ended, Evelyn felt the familiar exhaustion that came from balancing her role as CEO of a global corporation with her role as founder of a foundation that demanded her emotional energy as much as her financial resources. Marcus was waiting in her temporary office when the board meeting ended. He'd flown in from Singapore specifically for this conversation, which meant it was important. The Moore Corporation integration is complete, he announced without preamble. All divisions are now operating under Pierce Global Holdings protocols. Employee retention is at 94%. Revenue is up 18% now that we've eliminated the fraud and embezzlement. Good. Evelyn sat behind the desk that had once been Thomas's throne. What about the pension fund restoration? Fully funded as of yesterday. Every employee who lost money from Thomas's theft has been made whole, plus interest. Marcus consulted his tablet. We also implemented a new oversight structure so it can never happen again. Independent auditors, employee representation on the pension board, full transparency in reporting. And the company culture? Changing, but it takes time. We've fired or reassigned everyone who was complicit in the Moore family's schemes. New leadership is implementing ethics training, whistleblower protections, and regular compliance audits. Marcus looked up. The employees who were victimized are cautiously optimistic. They're waiting to see if the changes stick. They'll stick, Evelyn said. Make sure everyone understands that ethical lapses mean termination, regardless of how profitable someone is. I'd rather have a smaller company with integrity than a massive one built on corruption. Understood. Marcus hesitated. There's something else. Daniel sent a letter from prison. It was forwarded to our legal department. Evelyn felt nothing at the mention of Daniel's name. What does he want? To talk to you. He claims he's had time to reflect, that he understands what he did wrong, that he wants to apologize properly. Marcus's tone made clear what he thought of this. He's requesting a visit. No. I figured, but I had to tell you. He had 3 years to treat me with basic human decency and chose not to. He doesn't get my time now. Evelyn pulled up her schedule on her computer. What's the status of the Moore family's remaining assets? Catherine's jewelry collection sold at auction last month. Proceeds went to restitution for victims. Thomas's art collection is being evaluated. Some pieces will be sold, others are being donated to museums. The yacht was seized and sold. Marcus scrolled through his notes. Daniel's penthouse was foreclosed on. Victoria moved out months ago, by the way. Last I heard, she's living with her parents and trying to launch a podcast about overcoming public scandals. Evelyn almost laughed. Of course she is. It's not going well. Turns out people don't want to hear someone who participated in public cruelty play the victim card. Marcus set down his tablet. There is one more thing. The federal government is recognizing you next month. Recognizing me for what? For your cooperation with their investigation and your work on behalf of corporate fraud victims. There's going to be a ceremony. The Attorney General wants to present you with a commendation. Evelyn rubbed her temples. Can I decline? You could, but it would draw more attention than just accepting it. Marcus leaned forward. Evelyn, I know you hate the spotlight, but Patricia was right in the board meeting. Your visibility matters. Young women, women in bad situations, women who feel powerless. They need to see that fighting back is possible. I'm not a symbol, Evelyn protested. Yes, you are. You became one the moment you walked into that boardroom and took everything from people who thought they were untouchable. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. You don't have to like it, but you can use it. Think about how many women have reached out to the foundation because your story gave them courage to leave bad situations. He was right, and Evelyn knew it. The center's intake coordinators reported that dozens of women explicitly cited Evelyn's story as the reason they'd sought help. If her visibility could save even one life, she had an obligation to accept it. Fine, she said. I'll accept the commendation, but I'm bringing Sarah Chen and 2 other center residents with me. If they want to celebrate taking down powerful men who abuse their positions, they should celebrate the women who survived that abuse. Marcus grinned. Perfect. I'll coordinate with Grace on the details. That evening, Evelyn walked alone through the mansion's gardens. Spring had transformed the grounds into something beautiful. Flowers bloomed where there had been only decorative shrubs. Walking paths wound through areas that had previously been off-limits to everyone except the Moore family. The gates that had kept people out were now open during the day, and local residents often walked through, enjoying the peaceful space. She found herself at the spot where her car had picked her up that rainy night 6 months ago. The night she'd made the phone call that started everything. Standing there now, dry and warm in the spring evening, Evelyn reflected on how completely her life had changed. The quiet woman who'd served coffee and smiled politely while being insulted was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that invisibility could be a weapon, that patience could be strategic, that silence could be gathering strength rather than accepting weakness. I thought I might find you here, a familiar voice said. Evelyn turned to see her father approaching. Jonathan Pierce looked older than he had 6 months ago, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as always. He'd flown in from London specifically for this conversation, which told Evelyn everything she needed to know about its importance. Dad? She accepted his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to see the center in person, to understand what you've built here. Jonathan looked back at the mansion. It's extraordinary, sweetheart. Truly extraordinary. They walked together through the gardens, and Evelyn found herself telling her father things she hadn't shared with anyone else. About the loneliness of those 3 years married to Daniel, pretending to be someone she wasn't. About the anger that had sustained her through the investigation and acquisition. About the unexpected peace she'd found in transforming the Moore mansion into something meaningful. Do you regret it? Jonathan asked finally. Marrying him in the first place? Evelyn considered the question carefully. I regret the pain. I regret the 3 years of my life I spent being treated as less than human, but I don't regret what came from it. Without those 3 years, I wouldn't have understood how people like the Moores operate. I wouldn't have been able to take them down as completely as I did, and I definitely wouldn't have thought to create this center. So suffering was useful, Jonathan said dryly. Suffering was educational, Evelyn corrected. There's a difference. Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her directly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Are you done? With the Moores, with revenge, with all of it? Or is there still something driving you that I should be worried about? Evelyn met her father's eyes. I'm done. The Moores are in prison. Their company is reformed. Their victims have been compensated. The mansion is helping people. What more is there? Closure, Jonathan said quietly. You've achieved justice, but have you achieved peace? The question stopped Evelyn cold. She'd been so focused on the practical aspects of destroying the Moores and building the center that she hadn't really examined her own emotional state. Was she at peace? I'm getting there, she said finally. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes I walk through the ballroom and remember standing there in that cream dress, watching Daniel hand me divorce papers. Sometimes I wake up angry at how much time I wasted on him. But then I see women like Sarah Chen getting job offers, or I review the center's success metrics, or I watch the gardens fill with people who would never have been allowed here when the Moores owned it, and I feel like maybe it was all worth it. Jonathan nodded slowly. Your mother wanted me to tell you she's proud of you, not for destroying the Moores. She actually thought you were too gentle with them, but for what you've built from the ashes. Too gentle? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. They're in federal prison. Your mother suggested we should have bought the prison and made their lives more unpleasant. Jonathan's eyes twinkled. I told her that was excessive. She disagreed. Despite everything, Evelyn laughed. Her mother was a force of nature who'd always believed in overwhelming retaliation against anyone who hurt her family. The fact that she thought Evelyn had shown restraint was almost funny. Tell Mom I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm satisfied with the outcome. I will. Jonathan squeezed her shoulder. Now, I want to see everything. Show me the center. Introduce me to the staff. Let me understand what my daughter has created here. They spent the next 2 hours touring the facility. Jonathan asked thoughtful questions, listened intently to staff explanations, and spoke with several residents about their experiences. By the end, he was writing a substantial check to the Foundation's endowment. This work matters, he said simply. It matters more than most of what we do in the business world. After her father left, Evelyn retreated to her private office, a small room on the second floor that had once been a maid's quarters. She preferred it to Thomas's grand study because it was modest, functional, and hers in a way the mansion had never been when she lived here as Daniel's wife. She pulled out a file she'd kept locked in her desk drawer. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from women who'd reached out after hearing her story. Some were thanking her for the inspiration to leave abusive relationships. Others were sharing their own stories of being underestimated and fighting back. A few were from young women in business who'd faced discrimination and found courage in Evelyn's example. She read through them slowly, absorbing the impact her actions had created beyond just destroying the Moors. These women had found strength in her story. They'd made changes in their own lives because they'd seen that fighting back was possible. This, Evelyn realized, was what her father had meant by peace. Not the absence of anger, but the presence of purpose that transcended anger. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was from a woman named Jennifer Martinez, who'd been married to a tech executive for 12 years. He'd controlled every aspect of her life, her money, her friends, her daily schedule. She'd felt powerless until she read about Evelyn's story. You showed me that being underestimated could be an advantage, Jennifer wrote. My husband thought I was too stupid to understand his business. He talked freely in front of me, never thinking I was paying attention. But I was. I documented everything, and last month I filed for divorce with evidence of his financial infidelity and tax fraud. He's now under investigation, and I have full custody of our children. I have you to thank for showing me that quiet women can be the most dangerous opponents. Evelyn set down the letter and looked out the window at the gardens below. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and amber light. Tomorrow there would be more work, board meetings, and interviews, and operational decisions. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd started with nothing but anger and patience. She'd built a plan across 3 years of careful observation. She'd executed that plan with precision and ruthlessness. And in the end, she'd created something that mattered more than revenge. The Moore family was gone, but the Pierce Foundation Center would help women for generations. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Grace entered with a tablet. Sorry to bother you, but there's a news alert you should see. Evelyn took the tablet and read the breaking story. Daniel Moore had been moved to a different facility after a fight with another inmate. He was fine, but the incident had made headlines because of who he was, or rather, who he'd been. The mighty have fallen, Grace observed quietly. They were never mighty, Evelyn corrected. They were just wealthy. There's a difference. She handed back the tablet, uninterested in Daniel's problems. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with them. That was justice, pure and simple. The ceremony at the Department of Justice took place on a bright morning in May. Evelyn stood on a stage with the Attorney General, accepting a commendation for her cooperation in the investigation and prosecution of the Moore family. Sarah Chen stood beside her, along with 2 other women from the center, Maria Gonzalez, who'd escaped an abusive marriage and now worked as the center's intake coordinator, and Rachel Kim, who'd arrived 6 months ago with nothing and now ran her own consulting business. The Attorney General's speech focused on the importance of whistleblowers and witnesses who came forward despite personal risk. Ms. Pierce could have simply divorced her husband and walked away, he said. She had the resources to disappear and never think about the Moore family again. Instead, she spent 3 years gathering evidence of crimes that had hurt countless people. She worked with federal investigators to build cases that will stand up in court. And then she took the place where she was humiliated and transformed it into a beacon of hope. He turned to Evelyn. Your courage and commitment to justice have made a real difference in people's lives. On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you. The applause was genuine and sustained. Evelyn accepted the commendation with grace, but her brief speech focused not on herself but on the 3 women standing with her. I'm honored to receive this recognition, she said. But I'm not the hero of this story. The real heroes are women like Sarah, Maria, and Rachel, who survived impossible situations and rebuilt their lives. The real heroes are the counselors and lawyers and volunteers who work at the Pierce Foundation Center every day. The real heroes are every woman who's ever been told she was worthless and chose to prove that wrong. She looked directly at the cameras. If you're in a situation where you feel powerless, please know that you're not. There are resources available. There are people who will help. And there is always a path forward, even when you can't see it yet. The speech went viral within hours. The Pierce Foundation Center's phone lines were flooded with calls from women seeking help. Donations increased by 300% in a single week. Other cities reached out asking how they could replicate the center's model. Evelyn had become, despite her reluctance, a symbol of resistance against abuse and corruption. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Evelyn received an unexpected visitor at the center. The receptionist called her office, sounding uncertain. Ms. Pierce, there's someone here asking to see you. She says her name is Victoria Chen. Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. Send her to my office. Victoria looked different than she had 6 months ago. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by ordinary jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was natural, without the expensive highlights. She wore minimal makeup. She looked, Evelyn thought, like an actual human being, rather than a carefully curated image. Thank you for seeing me, Victoria said, hovering near the door. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Evelyn gestured to a chair. What do you want? Victoria sat, clutching her purse like a lifeline. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For participating in your humiliation, for celebrating your divorce, for being cruel when you'd never done anything to me. You were cruel because Daniel's money and status mattered more to you than basic human decency, Evelyn said bluntly. Why should I believe you're sorry now? Because I understand what it's like to be on the other side now. Victoria's voice was quiet. After everything fell apart, after I left Daniel, I tried to go back to my old life. But everyone knew I'd only been with him for his money. I lost all my sponsorships, my social media following evaporated, my so-called friends disappeared. I've spent the past 6 months working retail at my parents' store and trying to rebuild from nothing. She looked up, and Evelyn saw genuine shame in her eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I put you through, and I'm sorry. Evelyn studied the woman who'd laughed while Daniel handed her divorce papers. Part of her wanted to tell Victoria to leave, to refuse the apology, to make her feel as small as she'd made Evelyn feel. But that would accomplish nothing except perpetuating cruelty. I accept your apology, Evelyn said finally. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger about it only hurts me. You'll have to live with your choices. That's consequence enough. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. After Victoria left, Evelyn sat in her office for a long time, thinking about grace and consequences and the complicated nature of justice. She'd destroyed the Moores completely because they'd spent decades hurting people without remorse. But Victoria, for all her faults, had at least reached the point of understanding her mistakes. Maybe that was growth. Maybe that was enough. The summer brought unexpected peace. The center continued to thrive, helping hundreds of women rebuild their lives. Pierce Global Holdings posted record profits under ethical management. The former Moore Corporation divisions were exceeding expectations now that they operated without fraud and embezzlement. Evelyn split her time between Singapore and New York, managing her business empire while staying involved with the foundation's work. She dated occasionally, carefully, cautiously, with the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd learned to see past charm to character. Nothing serious yet, but she was open to the possibility of something real eventually. On the 6-month anniversary of the center's opening, Evelyn stood once again in the ballroom where her old life had ended. A celebration was in progress. Not for her, but for the 50 women who'd graduated from the center's residential program and were moving on to independent lives. Sarah Chen had flown in from Boston to speak, along with a dozen other success stories. "This place saved my life," Sarah told the crowd. "Not because it gave me money or a job, though it helped with both. It saved my life because it showed me I was worth saving, because it gave me space to remember who I was before someone tried to break me, because it proved that the worst moment of your life doesn't have to define the rest of your life." She looked at Evelyn. "Thank you for showing us that power isn't about money or status. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it." The applause was thunderous. Later, when the celebration had ended and the guests had left, Evelyn walked through the empty ballroom one last time. The ghosts of that awful night were finally gone, replaced by the echoes of laughter and hope. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "The final Moore Corporation integration report is complete. It's over. We won." Evelyn smiled and typed back, "We didn't win. We just made things right." She left the ballroom and walked out into the summer evening. The gardens were beautiful in the fading light, full of people enjoying the peace and safety of a space that had once been forbidden to them. Somewhere in a federal prison, Daniel Moore was serving year 1 of his 12-year sentence. Catherine was adjusting to life behind bars. Thomas was declining, his health failing under the stress of confinement. They'd spent their lives believing money and status made them untouchable. They'd learned otherwise. And Evelyn Pierce, the quiet woman they'd thrown away in the rain, had become the storm that swept away their empire and built something meaningful from the ruins. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate their suffering. She simply moved forward, building a life defined not by anger or revenge, but by purpose and the knowledge that she'd never again let anyone make her feel invisible. The woman they'd called nothing had proven she was everything, and that was victory enough.